welcome to Down to Art. I'm your host, Kristy Gordon, and today I'm joined by John Dalton, an artist and the podcaster who runs Gently Does It. So welcome, John. It's so good to have you.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me to come on.
You were totally the first person I thought of when I thought of running a podcast. So just quickly, John is an amazing artist, and he also is a writer. So he's written books similar to his paintings that kind of explore the mystical and, reality, lots of explorations that I'm really into. And he's been running the Gently Does It podcast, which is pretty much, I would say for sure, the most popular artist podcast out there. Every artist that I love has been on there. How long have you been running that for?
2013.
Whoa, amazing. What gave you the idea to start it?
I had just finished a book called May and Noise, and this isn't the first podcast I had. I had a podcast in 2006, right when podcasting was starting, and that was to accompany a book I'd written at that time, which is called Why Do We Get Sick? Why Do We Get Better? The subtitle on that is a wellness detective manual. So, I had a podcast with that for a good while, I'd say a year or two. And then podcasting just sort of died and everybody just stopped doing it. So I didn't think much more about it. But then 2013, May and Noise, it was out, and I thought, a little podcast just to expand on these different things that I covered in May and Noise. And so that's what I did. For the first 12 episodes, I just kind of talked about the things that I'd covered in May and Noise. And I videoed them as well. So they were like video, because YouTube wasn't really around in 2006, not in the way that it was in 2013. So I thought, that'll be good. Have a bit of video and whatever. And then I kind of got to the end of everything I wanted to say and I just kind of left it there for about 6 months. And I was in the studio listening to podcasts and listening to interviews and going, that's nice, isn't it? Chatting to people. I think I'd like to do that. I think I'd like to take because the name of the website, the name of my website is johndalton.me because .com wasn't available. And then when you have a WordPress site, they kind of go, put a subtitle in, it sort of encourages you to invent something you never even would have thought about, So I was like, subtitle. Okay. So I put Gently Does It as the subtitle of the website. And I thought, that's nice. I like that. It's kind of a, few different, you can look at that from a few different angles. And then, so when the podcast came out, it just naturally took the name of the website. So that's, it wasn't very planned out or anything. It just kind of one thing flowed into the other. So when I started the interviewing people bit, I thought, okay, well, what am I interested in and what do I want to talk about? So the things I'm interested in are health, natural health, spirituality, consciousness, reality, that whole side of things, and art. And so I started to get in touch with people in those three different areas. And pretty much as soon as I started interviewing people, the podcast kind of started to exhibit a life of its own. And what was happening was that the health and the spirituality people, there was nothing but difficult, I'd have power cuts, I'd have technical problems, then I'd have appointment scheduling problems. I mean, if you go right back to the beginning, I have interviews with people who are in different kind of fields to art, but the art people it was like it was on wheels. It was so easy. Everybody that I got in touch with, it was fine. There was no technical problems, and it just took off. It just took off in that art direction. And then, I was interested in figurative art myself, but I was open to talking to any kind of artist, really. But same again, exhibited its life of its own, and it all just ended up being figurative artists. So it just took off in that direction. And it's funny, now I have another podcast to do with my further emergence work. And that's kind of similar to the spirituality consciousness, or the people I talk to on that. I haven't done a huge amount of interviews on that, but my main kind of criteria for who I want to talk to is whether I find the person inspiring, So it's funny, it's kind of come full circle.
Sorry to interrupt. What's that podcast called? Your other podcast?
Further Emergence.
Oh, Further Emergence. That sounds very
Further Emergence. Yeah, Further Emergence with John Dalton. But if you stick in Further Emergence, you'll find it. It's a combination of, I do retreats in that work, because the Further Emergence work is all to do with consciousness and growth and spiritual growth and consciousness, that kind of thing. And I do retreats, and I record the audio from the retreats. So it's a kind of a mix of the audio from the retreats might be one episode from a particular retreat, might be one episode, and then another one might be an interview. But it's funny, like without planning it, it's kind of come full circle in a way.
I love that. I also love that piece about how it just what was in the flow was the art thing at first, and now it's come full circle, but following what's easy, what's just flowing, that kind of reminds me of life to do that. And so you started it many years ago. Is there, and you've talked to pretty much all of my favorite artists, and just so all of the figurative artists basically. This is kind of a huge question, but is there, say, one big main tip that you can think of about that you've kind of gleaned from all your conversations with artists about how they found their voice as an artist, or something that helps them with their practice? Or are there overlaps? Now I'm starting to layer the questions.
Well, there's kind of standout things, and they stand out to me because they helped me. I'm a self-taught artist. I never went to art school, but I feel like doing this podcast has been similar in a way to the art school, because I've learned a lot of things technically, just from talking to people, and I've learned a lot of things in their approach. So I'm just going to say things that pop into my head. I remember Vincent Desiderio telling me this tip one time on one of the times he was on, and he was saying that he does this thing where he comes into the studio in the morning, and he tries to have the studio dark, almost so there's no light in the studio. And then he'll almost turn his back and then turn around and look at the painting in the semi-dark. And in that, then he can see things in the painting that he wouldn't normally see if the painting was, fully illuminated. I found that to be,
and I did that one stuck with me too. It's
it's a good tip, isn't it?
The arrangement of the light and dark. And I think he said and if you don't see that, you failed.
I forgot that bit, but okay.
I love
my natural filtering of must have kicked in. But I think it's to do with values, really, isn't it? The values, you really just see values in that. But I thought that was a great tip. That's something that stayed in my mind. The other thing that's stayed in my mind was something Bo Bartlett said, which was, he was talking about the capacity of paint to magically capture the emotion of the artist. And it's similar to something I remember hearing Gabriel Byrne, the Irish actor Gabriel Byrne, talking about acting. And he was saying that the camera does something similar. The camera has this magical ability to capture what you're thinking about. So his job as an actor was just to make sure he was thinking about the right things. And he said, I don't need to act. I just need to think about the right things, and the camera will capture it. That was fascinating. So then when Bo Bartlett was saying that about paint, is similar, very similar. And he was saying that when he teaches when he's teaching, he will say to his students, so, okay, so you mix the paint, you load your brush up, and then before you apply a brush, that you pause and then you blow on your brush. And what you're blowing onto your brush is the intention of the painting, which I thought was very nice, kind of almost shamanistic way of painting. But that really stuck in my mind. I'm very conscious of how I am on the inside when I'm painting now. And I know it's because of that, what he said.
Whoa, I love that. I'm going to totally start doing that. And it's so true. I've noticed that too. Like when I look at the paintings that I've done over the years, I feel like they totally capture the energy of like that time. Like sometimes I can look at them and suddenly be transported back to the actual like energetic feeling of that time, Yeah.
Well, what's happened to me, I've gone from painting. This is kind of something that came out of talking to lots of different artists, and I haven't heard anybody else mentioning this, but I came to realize that there were two kind of artists. There's like artists who have a very clear inner vision, and then their whole process of creating is about getting that inner vision onto the canvas as close to what their inner vision is as possible. And I used to paint like that. And, my earlier kind of paintings were very much, have very clear mental image. And then it would be all about, now I might gather references and, put it together on Photoshop or whatever, as, to get it as clear as I could before I start painting. But either way, it was to try and get it out of my head and onto the canvas. But then I started to realize, I think Martin Campos probably was the first painter. Martin Campos, and then Mel McCudden, who I never interviewed, but I saw him on YouTube. He's a little YouTube video about his process. And what Mel does is he will, instead of putting down a single color ground, he will put a few different colors down, and then he'll sort of mess them all up with a rag. So he has a kind of very fuzzy, almost kind of abstract painting. And then he will put that on the easel, and he will sit and look at it. And he'll keep looking at it until something appears out of the the colors.
Yep.
And then that's what he'll paint.
Oh.
And so Martin Campos is very similar in his approach. Like I remember him talking about, he's very intensely focused on his inner state, and he'll line up 4 or 5 canvases around him in a circle. Now, I'm not sure if he said this. I'd have to go back and listen to it, but this is what I took away from the conversation. And he will just stay very, very still on the inside, trying not to think of what he's going to paint or what's going to happen, just very still. And then he'll just kind of explode onto the 5 canvases all at the same time. And then he'll kind of, out of that, begin to see things, and then shapes and forms will come from that. Similar with Ron Hicks, he's very similar kind of approach, doesn't know what he's going to do until he makes the first mark, and the first mark leads to the second mark, and so on and so forth. And that became much more interesting to me, the process of exploration and the process of also talking to Nicholas Uribe actually was part of what changed it for me. I had Nicholas Uribe holds the record for being the longest podcast. His episode is 6 hours long. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love his work. I actually haven't heard that one. I'm going to listen to that for 6 hours.
Yeah.
I'll listen
so
to it
funny. Yeah. Like the only reason we finished was because my feet were killing me, because at that time I would always stand up when I was recording. So 6 hours standing up straight. I mean, we did have a break in the middle, very short break, but he was talking, he talked for 6 hours, so he talked a lot, but he was kind of talking about the process of painting and focusing on the process of painting more than the end result. He was kind of like, I don't care what it turns out like. I love the process of painting, and I learn things about myself in the process of painting. So that kind of went into me as well. And he was sort of saying, I I am exploring why I want to paint this thing. What is it about this person or whatever it is that I'm painting? What is it that sparked something in me that wants to paint it?
Yeah.
So yeah, sort of where I am now is I start off with reference photos, usually from nature. It doesn't have to be, of just something that, moved me to take a picture of it, which I'm sure everyone can relate to. You sort of see something. It's not a person. It's just something grabs your eye and you just go, oh, I just want to take a picture of that. I started with that. I'll use that as my reference, but I'm not trying to replicate it. I'm using it to kind of trigger something inside me of like, what is it? What was it about that made me want to paint it? And then I just go into this exploration thing, and yeah, it's wild. I'll stand back and go, oh my God, why did I paint that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But it's very dynamic and very, alive.
Yeah.
And then
there's so much pressure on artists to kind of know what we're painting, be able to talk about our work, that like I feel like sometimes that kind of compels me to have the question, like, why am I painting this, like in the back of my mind that you're talking about, because I don't always know, or like, what is this painting about? But I can sort of, I find that as I'm like working on it, it's sort of like similar to what you're talking about. It kind of reveals itself to me, like somehow it's related to my life in some way.
Yeah. It's got to the stage now with me where when I get to the end, I won't even know that it's over, and then suddenly the painting kind of goes, that's it, it's finished. Like, and here's the name. Okay.
Titles of podcasts and titles of paintings. I liked what you said before about the title of your podcast and how it came. It was really hard for me to choose my Down to Art title. Actually, a friend came up with it for me, and she's very smart. But I like that multiple meaning kind of like level of titles. How it might have like different connotations or whatever. But I guess first I was thinking, I find it so useful to be like making this podcast. Like, it's so interesting to have conversations with other artists, and just I think it's like really gonna be like a really worthwhile endeavor or whatever. What benefits have you found? I think a lot of artists are starting podcasts, and a lot of artists are like finding that it's useful. A lot of artists probably also think it's like way too much work, which maybe it might be for some. But what benefits do you think there are in having a podcast for an artist that might be thinking of starting one?
I don't know. Because well, I wouldn't recommend it. If you want because it is a lot of work, and it, for a long time I thought it was holding me back as an artist, because I had to give so much time to it. Because there was there's a big kind of community around it. There's people depending on it, particularly during a lot of the lockdowns. And while I was learning a lot, I wasn't like, every hour I spend doing a podcast is an hour I'm not in front of the easel.
Yeah.
So I think you need to go into it with your eyes open about that. There are benefits, of course. But then what really helped me was talking to Anne McGill, who's a great artist in the UK. And it wasn't on the podcast. This was afterwards, because I keep in touch with everybody and have cups of tea with them, and not all the time. It's not like 24/7 cups of tea, but I do keep in touch. Anyway, in one of these little chats with them, Anne I was kind of talking about this, and she said, "But the podcast is your art." And I was like, "What?" I thought the podcast was getting in the way of my art. And she said, "No." She said, "I don't think so at all. I think you have to sort of take yourself," she didn't say this, but I'm paraphrasing what she said. "You kind of have to take yourself where you are." And like, when I spoke to her, I'd probably had 150 or 160 episodes behind me. And she was kind of going, that's your art. You are a communicator. You're someone who brings people together. You've got all the, I think because she had a broader vision of art than just painting, she could see that, and I couldn't see that. So since seeing that, I've been a lot more at peace with that question. So if you're on fire for painting and you want to be a painter and you want to paint paintings, don't start a podcast. Find another way. Find another way of connecting with people, because the benefits are, if your podcast does well, you can get access to other artists and you can pick their brains, and you can you learn for sure, and you learn a lot. But there's other ways to do that. So it's great. It's great for community, and you do have, you do make nice connections. But I think as a painter, a figurative painter, it hasn't helped me, with that as a career,
Right.
So I think if you're going to do a podcast, you want to know that, because as you say, there's a lot of podcasts now. Like, there's so many more podcasts now than there was in 2013, for sure. So I am in the happy position where, as you say, it's well known, people know it. So it's but even at that, I haven't checked my rankings, or I don't know where I am in the rankings or anything like that. I kind of stopped doing all that because it was just soul destroying. Because I never, there are other podcasts that have been around for longer, and they're generally always ahead of me. But I also know that I have a very good idea of who listens to the podcast. So I kind of know I've reached the people that I want to reach. And, if I had a podcast about the art world in a broader sense and included everything else, I might have more listeners, but I'm not that interested in more listeners, because I'm just I like the area that I'm in,
Yeah, and I think you really I don't know. I think you were at the top in the area that you're in. And so on a technical level, even though you might not just suggest that artists considering starting podcasts start one, on a technical level, though, I'd love to pick your brain about how to do it for those of us who are starting. I was just talking to Teresa Oaxaca the other day. I was on her podcast, and I think she started hers maybe about a year ago. And she was talking about how she had this idea to make an episode where a bunch of artists get drunk and look at Hieronymus Bosch and talk about him or something. And I think she maybe chatted with you about it, and you were like, that's probably more fun to record than it is to listen to. And I totally agree. I find there's a lot of podcasts out there where people are talking over each other, and it for me, it's irritating to listen to. I actually can't do it. And in editing these first few episodes that I've got going, I noticed that I have this tendency that I wasn't aware of to respond in the middle of conversation. Someone will be talking, they'll be or whatever. But then it's now all of a sudden I'm talking over the other person. And she kind of mentioned that you had sort of suggested even a little pause between speaking. The person ends what they're saying, and there's that little pause. It sounds better on podcasts. Maybe it's less natural in real life. So these are the types of things. And then I want to get into mics and other technical aspects. But do you have any other sort of suggestions about, interviewing people, having conversations that sound good on podcasts?
Yeah. Well, just to go back to the before I finish, depressing everybody who's aspiring to have a podcast. I think if it's in your head to have a podcast, then I would include that in your, I wouldn't kind of go, oh no, I want to be a serious painter, I'm not having a podcast. I think if it's, because not everybody wants to have a podcast,
No.
So I think if it occurs to you to have one, then maybe sort of have a think about that and sort of expand your idea of yourself as an artist to include communication, community building, everything else. Because even if you're very dedicated figurative kind of painter, if that's where your focus is. There's so many other things that we have to do anyway, like social media and promotion, and that was the whole NFT thing. If you got into that, and there'll be the new thing, and there'll be new social media. So like you could kind of go, yeah, and I still would like to have a podcast. I'd like to hear what I have to say, hear what another person has to say. I think rather than kind of, I'm not like, I don't want to put everybody off or anything, but I think go into it with your eyes open, and maybe it would be the beginning of expanding your perspective as an artist, of
That's
who you are as an
a really
artist.
good point. And I feel like we can also, like, we don't have to have like the most amazing podcasts like you. I might just put out an episode once a month sometimes. I think it's also okay if we just do like a lower level. But actually, I want to pick your brain about that too, about frequency and how much it makes a difference. Like, but I'm layering the questions. That's another thing that I shouldn't be doing. What was the first one that I asked you a minute ago?
It was about just tips for talking to people. Right. I think the most helpful thing I had at the beginning for me was I was very clear. Well, okay, I have years of being a therapist, so I have years of listening to people. So I'm just saying that because there are things that I do automatically that other people don't do, and it's kind of hard for me to be objective about why I do things the way I do, but I think it's very much informed by listening to people who are in pain, talking about what they need to talk about. So I think my listening skills are high, like above average, understandably, because I was doing it for years, and I still do it. So, but I think a good place to start when interviewing someone is, I was always very clear that people were not tuning into the podcast to listen, to hear me. Right. Now, maybe they do now because they know me, but certainly at the beginning, I was really clear that people are listening to this podcast because they like the artist I'm talking to, and they want to hear them. So I was very much, because in a normal conversation, I say one thing, you go, oh, no, I do it this way. And then you come back and you say your bit. And then I say, in a podcast, it's different. For me, anyway, it's like, no, it's all about you. I'm not going to jump in there with my opinion too much. A little bit, I will. But mostly, I'm very conscious of the third person in the conversation, who's the listener. And, they really want to hear the artist. So I'm going to give the artist as much space as they need to say whatever they need, and I'm going to frame my questions so that they get the best opportunity to say everything that they need to say. In terms of talking over people, from the beginning, I always made sure I recorded on 2 channels so that I had separate audio. And once you have separate audio, you can sort it all out, because it's normal in a conversation and natural in a conversation for people to talk over each other. But listening back to it, it just can sound a bit crashing, and one thing crashes into another. So I will give a bit of air between things. I'll separate things out so that if somebody makes a joke, that the person listening can hear the joke fully before the laughter or before the comeback or whatever it is. Whereas in actuality, we were talking over each other, and I was saying this fantastic joke and the other person probably didn't even hear it.
Yep.
Or they were, or whatever,
How do you do the different audio recordings? Like, how do you get to audio?
Okay, so now I do everything through Zoom, and I use GarageBand to edit. But I think anything I'm going to say, you can do it on whatever the PC equivalent of it, would be like, what's the one that's really popular on the PCs? Audition or something. I can't remember the name of it. But there's very similar software. So Zoom will record. You can tell Zoom to give you separate audio. So it will
I didn't know that.
generally. Yeah.
I'm doing that right now.
Yeah, it gives you three things. It gives you now I think I pay for my Zoom because my conversations are long and but I don't think it's a huge amount. I think it's like maybe €20 a month or something like that. So what it'll do when it's finished, it will download the whole thing onto my computer. And what it gives me is the video. Then it gives me a mixed audio. And then it creates another little folder and it gives everybody's audio separately.
Wow, that's huge.
But Zoom is kind of rubbish for audio. It's not great. It kind of compresses it, makes it a bit weird. So, and particularly because I have a nice enough microphone. It's not high end or anything. It's a Samsung SAMSON. I think it cost me $100 a couple of years ago, good few years ago, and it's fine. But it sounds way better than what Zoom gives me back of like my singular audio channel sounds terrible in comparison to this. So I record my audio directly into GarageBand. So when I finish recording with somebody, I have one channel that's very nice of me. And then I can go to that folder and I can get the person I was talking to and I just drag that into GarageBand and then I have their audio. And, you have to fiddle around with it a little bit to get the sync right so that, it is the same, it's the right conversation. And then once that happens, then I can add gaps, I can pull things apart along if I need to.
That's cool. Can Zoom do two separate videos too? Do you know? Or how do you deal with now that like you're placing it on YouTube and stuff? If you kind of shift things around, you've got the video that becomes like problematic.
I don't put it on YouTube much.
Okay, so it's all audio.
I did a bit and I plan to do more, but I found the work involved in YouTube was very disproportionate to the amount of people who actually watched it. Okay. So I kind of, I like having a good sense of who is listening to the podcast is, I think that's really important as well. And to find some way of engaging with them. And one of the ways is, looking at the number of people who were using YouTube to listen to the podcast, because initially the podcasts that I put up on YouTube, it was just like a still and then the audio.
That's what I was.
But not that many people were listening to it. And the amount of hassle to do it, I was like, I'm going to have to rethink that.
I'm hoping my YouTube channel takes off, but so far like 30 people listen to each video.
Well, what I'm going to do is, because since I switched over to Zoom, because I used to do everything on Skype, which there was no video. Now I have, probably for the last 2 years, I have a huge archive of video.
True.
But I think putting up a 3-hour conversation on YouTube is not a great idea. So I think what I will do is put up little short, like 10 minutes extracts from the conversation with the video of the two of us. And then maybe, if the person is talking about a particular painting, drop some stills in. So I'll make a nice little 10-minute thing. And then if people want to hear more of that, then they can go and listen to the podcast, the full audio version of it. I think that would be a better use of YouTube. Because smart. YouTube kind of runs on short, 10, 15 minutes, anything longer than that. And I don't think it really works that well on YouTube, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I like that visual component of like popping it's not hard to do, a couple photos of their paintings in, and that makes it really interesting. I like it's starting to touch on like how you promote your podcast, which I don't think you even need to do at this point. I think it's just like taken off. But for anyone starting a podcast, do you have any other ideas. I mean, I already think that one is actually a good way. Not that I have anyone watching my YouTube, but if I did, it could be a good way to like have people find my podcast or whatever.
Well, if you do a short little thing on YouTube, that's very shareable, say on Facebook. So you can kind of and you could probably put it on Instagram as well. If it's only 10 minutes long, you could put the whole thing on Instagram.
Yeah.
So you can really get a bit more out of it, But like anything else, it's more work, and you have to be sure that it's gonna do what you want it to do. Because it's nice to drop video, to drop stills in and make the video lovely. But if it takes you half a day to do that, which it could very easily, then that's another half day that you are not doing other things. So you have to think about it.
Yeah, I know that's tricky. I don't know. Did you ever do like email, like things to an email? I have like a pretty big email art update list I might share.
Yes. Yeah. I think I have about 750 people on my email list, and I haven't sent out a newsletter since before the lockdowns.
Yeah, I finally did, but it had been a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's, for me, because I'm a writer, I mean, the last person you want to ask to write something is a writer, because, writing, I heard somebody like a definition of a writer. A writer is somebody for whom writing is very difficult. And I think that's true. Like I have a friend who's a script writer, and he was like, I can't stand when my wife gives me the birthday card, and go, here, write something funny. Like he's a comedy writer. It's like, it's not easy. But yeah, like there's a real like all the lockdowns changed my podcast like significantly. Before the lockdowns, I'd say every 3 weeks, maybe a month, I would put an episode out. And my general workflow was I would spend a period of time researching the person I was going to talk to, the artist I was going to talk to. Now, that could be anything from a day to, I think the longest was 5 days.
Whoa.
With Vincent Desiderio, because he's so much stuff, and there's so much, he has written and has been written about him, and he's been interviewed so many times. Because one of the things I aim towards is I wanted to be interesting for the person I'm talking to. So I try not to ask them questions they've been asked before. So part of the research was to, see what's already been covered, and not kind of just, ask them the very obvious kind of questions. And then I'd soak up all that information, and I would come up with questions for them that elicited what they call discovery. Now, I didn't even know what that was until somebody said, oh, I love your podcast. There's such great discovery in it. And I was like, what's that? And they were saying that it's when the person goes, I've never thought about that before. And then they answer, that's broadcasting gold. when you ask somebody a question, and then they're so intrigued by it that they discover something new about themselves. So my research process all led to those kind of questions, not on purpose. They were just like, I was curious. I was like, I have never heard anybody ask her about this. So I'm curious about that. Why, how did this affect them or whatever? So anything from 1 to 5 days researching, then, half a day to record. And then I would edit the whole conversation, and I would take out every and and any other irritating thing that I found. And my general kind of where I was coming from with that was, I wanted to make everybody sound great, me and the person I was talking to. And, generally the person I was talking to more than me, but generally. So I was always very conscious of the first 10, 15 minutes. That had to be so listenable to, just had to kind of flow through out of the earphones. So no as I just any vocal tics that the person had, I would just make them disappear. So editing could take me 2 days, 2 full days. So that's like a week when you add it all up, just for one episode.
Yeah.
So then the lockdowns come along, and people are getting in touch going, can we have more episodes, please? We're going insane. So I kind of had a good relationship with people who listen to the podcast. So I was able to say to them, well, look, I can do more episodes, but things will have to change. So I said, no, here are the things that take my time. So editing and research. So if you are okay with ums and ahs and all that stuff, then that's going to save me time. And then if you send me in the questions you want to hear the answers to, then I don't have to do any research. Ooh, so then that's when I did the first, I was so nervous about it because I was sure everyone was going to be driven mad by the ums and ahs and all this kind of thing. I was like, oh, this is not going to last. They're going to go, no, let's go back to the editing. I can't stand that, person's vocal tics or whatever, But no, it was the opposite. Everyone was like, I loved it. We love it. We love the rawness. We love it's like, that's how the person really talks. We really like that. So yeah, I in my nervousness before it started, I was like, okay, I'm going to call this the person's name, so say like it's Kristy Gordon Uncut, just so everyone's really clear. There's no editing here. And that those two things changed it a lot, because the fact that people were able to send in their own questions, that made a big difference to the person who sent in the question. They could hear their name being read out. It's like a kid, your name is read out on the radio. Yeah. So I think it makes a big difference to them. Yeah. And then also, I don't have to do I always do a little bit of research. I kind of think it's courtesy to just have a little bit of knowledge about the person, but I can generally do it all in a day now. So my workflow now is I will get the person to advertise that they're coming on the podcast. I'll get them to send me an image, and then I'll sort of change it around, put my stuff on it and send it back to them. They post that on their social media, whether, Instagram and Facebook usually. I'll do the same. Or what I've taken to doing now is I make a lot of posts in the run up to talking to the person. I generally record on Wednesdays. So on Monday and Tuesday, I will put up maybe 5 or 6 paintings on one day, and then another 5 or 6 the next day, saying this person's going to be on the podcast. Because what I discovered with Instagram was, if I put it up, I used to do this, I put up 10 images on that where you could slide across, but that's like one shot at a person's feed. Whereas if I put up 6 separate posts or 12 separate posts, that's 12 shots at the person's feed. So maybe they'll see one of them and go, oh, that artist is going to be on. Brilliant. I have a question. So, and then they do that as well, and I've had, like, I remember with Colleen Barry, she got something like 300 questions came in. Wow. Which that's a lot of work from me. Yeah, a lot of cutting and pasting, and grouping, and so there's still work involved in it. But I can generally, I'll do those posts on a Monday and a Tuesday. Then on Wednesday morning, I'll just start collating everything, and grouping the questions together and getting a sort of a logical progression to the conversation, because it generally starts off with influences, then into a lot of technical stuff, and we get through the technical stuff, and then we're into the more philosophical approach and what's going on and any kind of other random kind of questions, and then we kind of finish with business and a few other things like that. So it has a kind of a natural flow. So I'm sort of slotting questions into those different areas. It's different from every artist, but generally speaking, so that by the time 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon comes along, I'm ready with everybody's questions, and off we go. And I've found that like by inviting people, and like I don't use it as a criteria, but if I happen to invite an artist on and they have a big following, generally I'll get it actually doesn't happen that much anymore because of the changes in the algorithm, but generally I'll get a little bit of a boost. I used to get a little bit of a boost on Instagram because their followers would kind of discover more about my podcast. So that's one way of promoting it. That was a very long-winded way of getting around to that answer, but that's one way of promoting it by, when you invite an artist on, all their followers and fans will discover your podcast, and that in a way kind of grows it. I found the getting people to send in questions indirectly helped my Patreon as well. I didn't unintentionally, but it did, because if somebody asks a question, sends in a question from Patreon, like I generally give all the people on Patreon, they have like priority over everything because they're the ones who have put their money where their mouth is, and they really like the podcast. They like it so much they're buying me cups of tea. Which is my kind of way of saying that they're my patrons. So when somebody sends in a question from Patreon, I'll say, here's a question from Bill on Patreon. Thanks for the tea, Bill. And it's genuine. I am thanking them. But I found that what that has the effect of is kind of continually reminding people who are listening, hey, this is a podcast. It doesn't just, run on air. I've tried telling all the people that I, have expenses with, hey, I'm doing a podcast, so you should give me my rent free, and they're not interested. They want the money. So,
that's a nice, gentle way of doing it. Gentle way of doing
it.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't like, initially when I went on Patreon, when it started, I did all the things that you're supposed to do, and none of them worked for me. And I, if you listen to, I don't think I ever took them off. Like I was I think I was trying to guilt people into it. I was kind of going, look, this is a free, thing. Help out. If you like the podcast, why don't you, get on Patreon? That was the tone. Didn't work at all. And in fact, I remember one comment saying, oh, why are you always scrounging for money? It's like, what? It's a free podcast.
Yeah.
Whereas now I am much more relaxed about that. Mainly it was not that I wasn't relaxed. I just didn't know what you're supposed to do, Whereas I copied it from other podcasts, actually. Somebody was talking about, and they were talking about the price of a pint. So I don't drink, but I do drink tea. So I thought, what's the price of a cup of tea? So if you would like to send me the price of a cup of tea, that would be brilliant. It would mean a lot to me, and it helps. And you help the people who can't afford to do that. I borrowed all that from somebody else, another podcast I was listening to, and that seems to work better. So I have a little reminder in the middle of every episode, and then I have a just before you go kind of thing at the end, a little reminder, because I say it in that just before you go thing, but it's true. Like most people who become patrons, they generally go, I'm, sorry it's taken me this long to get around to being your patron. It's not that I don't think your podcast is great or I don't have the money. I just didn't get around to it. So it's more just to remind them, oh yeah, if you want to, that would be very good. It helps. It all helps,
Yeah, I think that is important. And in like attracting them with honey, it's like a subtle way, and it's kind of cool. I don't know. I like that. Well, this has been so interesting, John. Maybe the last question I have is just another technical one. What app do you use? Like I use Anchor, which kind of puts the podcast on all the different podcast platforms. Which one do you use?
I use castos.com, castos.com. And that I think it's a plugin for WordPress. So they host the podcast for me. They don't promote it. I think I put it up on iTunes, ages ago. That was the only place I put it. And then I put it on Spotify when Spotify started to come up. There are a million other pod this, Podomatic, Podbean, you name it, pod with everything. I didn't do any of those because I found that if I covered those two biggish ones, and if the podcast gets reasonably, well followed, it's going to propagate onto all those other ones anyway,
Oh,
So yeah, it's because again, it's all time, because to register each one, no, it just took too long. And because it works on the RSS feed anyway, they are all trying to make their catalogs look like they're full of podcasts anyway. So they just pull the RSS feeds in anyway. And so it's more a matter of claiming your podcast now. For me anyway, because I'm sure I'm on loads of things, and it's like, are you the owner of this podcast? I think I had to do that on Spotify eventually. I got around to it.
That's interesting. I mean, your podcast is really easy to find. Yeah, I think it's on all of them. So that I didn't know that they would sort of find you otherwise. But this has been so interesting. I'll have to actually get you back to talk about Patreon one day, which is a whole nother topic. But yeah, every time I talk to you, I learn so much, and it's also just really interesting. And I'm so grateful for all the episodes you have out. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, John. And I can't wait to talk to you again sometime.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. And thanks very much, and well done. And for yours, I mean, I know better than most. It's not easy to do a podcast, so well done.
Thanks for noticing that I started one. Thanks. Yeah, it's great. Well, talk to you soon, John. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.